Chapter 30. The sirens wailed down the street as the first of many patrol cars arrived, illuminating the block of units with flashing blue and red lights. Emmett gladly gave up his post at the driveway to two uniformed officers, slumping into the front seat of his car and closing the door behind him. He couldn't believe it. Owen Peters had killed his girlfriend. And not only that, Emmett pictured the blue tarpaulin, but he appeared to be responsible for the deaths of Rosemary and Natalie too. He shook his head as he remembered the way Nicholas would so eagerly rush to his coach at football practice. "Mr. Peters, look what I can do! Mr. Peters, kick it to me!" It didn't seem possible. And where is he now? Emmett wondered as his phone lit up with an incoming call. "How's it going out there?" Bryce's voice barked through the car speaker. "Fine. Backup has just arrived. They'll secure the site until forensics are on scene." "Good. I've asked Carter and Williams to sit off the front gates of the primary school too, although the principal has assured us that Peters isn't there." That's a relief. Emmett distractedly read a text message that had just popped up. Tardio's found details of a property in St. Kilda which was bought under Owen's name several years back. He clipped his seatbelt in. "I'm going to meet her there." As he wove his way across the city, cutting between lanes and speeding down side streets, Emmett phoned his office. "I was just about to call you," Ted answered, slightly breathless. "Oh?" "I put in an urgent request to track Owen's phone, as you asked." "It's already done?" Emmett interrupted, staring at the time on the dashboard. "That was quick." "No, the tracking's not in place yet, but his network provider agreed to send over whatever data they could for the current month. It shows that his phone has been recording movement around St. Kilda since Monday night. The night Abby disappeared. Emmett's chest tightened, remembering Gloria Knowles' last communication with her daughter. Abby had been on her way to the school for the parent-teacher interviews. "But interestingly," Ted continued, "there was no activity that matched the phones of either Rosemary Norman or Natalie Gibson. Well, not that I can see at first glance anyway." "Really?" Emmett frowned. "But Charlotte's body was wrapped in a tarpaulin the exact same way we found Rosemary's and Natalie's bodies. That information was never released to the public. So unless he's a psychic, he has to be our man, doesn't he?" "I'm not suggesting he's not." Ted sounded almost defensive. "I was just making an observation. And given we know the killer used prepaid handsets to communicate with the first two victims, we can only assume that either he got lazy this time, or he wasn't prepared." Emmett pondered this. His homicide colleague might be right. Had Owen's interaction with Abby occurred unexpectedly? Or did he just no longer care about getting caught? "And there's one more thing." Ted's voice cut out momentarily as Emmett sped through the Domain tunnel. "Go on," he said when he was on the other side. "I've gone through those old school records that Carter found. Owen Peters was a classmate of Tom Norman's for several years." Emmett felt an icy rush pass through his body. Owen was the boy in the handmade pasta frame. After ending the call, he checked the GPS, happy to discover the flat he was heading to was around the next corner. It was only as he pulled up behind Bianca's car that another worry presented itself. Shit! He slammed his hands on the steering wheel, just as his colleague approached the window. "What is it?" she asked, leaning in. "I'd completely forgotten. Abby had her son with her on the night she disappeared. What's happened to him?" Standing out on the street, a few houses back from the looming block of flats, Emmett hugged his arms around his chest. Not the best place to visit in winter, is it? Bianca observed, just as another gust of wind struck them, kicking up leaves and bits of dirt. Emmett rubbed his eyes. In truth, he didn't really understand the attraction of St. Kilda at any time of year. The beach precinct was far too crowded and littered, and the trendy cafes that filled the shopping strips were ludicrously overpriced. So what do we know about this property then? He asked. Bianca pulled up the details on her phone. These were all government-commissioned housing back in the 70s and 80s, until the land was bought by a developer who had intentions of developing luxury beachside condos. It seems he ran into financial strife and had to sell off each flat individually for whatever he could. Emmett looked at the rundown block, so different from the glistening new apartment tower where Marcus Waiton lived, just a few streets along. And Owen Peters bought one of these? In 2017, a purchase was made under his name. All right. Emmett started walking, nodding to the two occupants of the unmarked police car parked directly opposite. Let's see if anyone's home. Their feet clanged noisily as they climbed the metal stairwell. Number 16. Emmett pressed his ear against the wooden door. I'll check the perimeter. Bianca shuffled along the narrow walkway, disappearing around a corner. She returned moments later, shaking her head. From what I can see, there's no other exit, although that front window isn't locked. Emmett looked where his colleague was indicating, his stomach sinking as he saw the deliberate gap that had been left, a few centimetres wide. Not a good sign. Knocking firmly on the door, he waited only moments before marching to the front window and sliding it open. Ugh! Ugh! Bianca made a gagging gesture before tugging her jacket up and over her mouth. Oh, that smell! Wait here. Emmett hoisted one leg through the opening, finding himself balancing awkwardly on a small kitchen bench top. Hello? He called out, not expecting a reply. The noxious stench intensified as he moved into a narrow hallway. Resting his right hand protectively over his gun holster, he stepped over discarded socks, a scrunched newspaper, and several empty cans of beer. The door to the left was ajar. Holding his breath, Emmett gave it a nudge, hanging back in case anyone should suddenly confront him. But there was nothing. Just that sickly smell growing ever stronger. He flicked a light switch. All okay? He heard Bianca call out. He opened his mouth to answer, and then closed it again, unable to find the words. The mattress that lay on the floor was heavily stained. A mixture of blood and fecal matter, he presumed. But it was the platinum blonde strands of hair that upset him the most, caught in a length of rope discarded on the floor. Numbly, he headed back to the hallway, where he stood at the entrance to the last remaining room. He placed a palm on his chest, his pulse racing. He knew what lay inside. 3, 2, 1. The white door swung inwards. Sure enough, there was Abby, her body lying naked in the bathtub, her vacant eyes staring up at the old shower head. Careful not to disturb the pile of clothes left on the dirty tiled floor, Emmett bent down, his throat catching as he took in the freshly cut scars on her abdomen. A glistening, bloody diamond. But what was that hanging around her neck? He crouched lower, staring at the silver coil in disbelief. It was a child's slinky toy, just like the one Nicholas had found hidden at the bottom of his Santa sack last Christmas. The steel wire that isn't perfectly flat. You okay? Emmett stood up, surprised to find Bianca's reflection staring back at him from the cracked mirror above the basin. Outside, he slumped sadly on the metal staircase as his mind raced. Rosemary, Natalie, Charlotte, Abby. 4 women left with gruesome cuts on their chests. What does it all mean? On the street below, he could see Bianca instructing the plainclothes officers, one hand wildly pointing to the flat on the 5th floor, while the other kept a phone glued to her ear. Emmett consciously slowed his breathing. Abby Knowles is dead, but where is her son? And where is Owen Peters? He was watching his colleague marching back up the stairwell when the answer came to him. I've spoken to the superintendent, Bianca started, about to join him on the steps. And there are more patrol units on the way. We have to move. Emmett leapt past her, keeping one hand on the rail as he skipped down the steps. What? Her voice trailed behind. Move where? But Emmett didn't stop to explain, instead running to his car and indicating furiously for Bianca to get in. Starting the ignition, he tugged at his seatbelt while swerving aggressively away from the curb. What's got into you? Bianca placed a steadying hand on the glove box in front of her as they veered jerkily across 2 lanes. Where are we going? Emmett pressed his lips together and stared resolutely forward. Tom's nursing home, he eventually said,